Yeah, hi. Good evening and welcome to CF Institute webinar on handholding clients through turbulent times. I'm Rishikesh Deshmukh. I earned my CFA in 2012. I have around 14 years of experience in financial services and currently I'm working with BNY Mellon as Vice President Business Analysis. I'm associated with CFA Institute as a volunteer for last 8 years in various capacities. So our today's session will be divided into two parts. One is 30 minutes, around 30 to 35 minutes presentation and 30 minutes for question and answer. I request all participants to use the question answer section of the app to ask relevant question. PowerPoint presentation will not be shared with anyone. The session handouts will be shared in the chat and will be shared 5 minutes before the end of session in the thank you mail. Your feedback is valuable. Your feedback is valuable to us. Please take a survey link shared in the confirmation email as well as it will be shared at the end of session in the thank you mail. Mandatory CFA Society India members that they need to complete this survey to get the C credit. Currently, we are going through unprecedented time of turbulence. It's a crisis. These times stand out from the other crises we have gone through due to information overload we see. Currently, apps like Facebook and WhatsApp are working at the universities and providing information on a mass level. In such time, they look at their advisors for the right advice. So to prepare the advisors among us to face the situation, today we have Mr. Bharat Pathak, a CA with more than 30 years of experience in financial industry, who believes in long-term, responsible and conservative yet effective approach to investment, where the client's interests always come first. The approach is where he likes to sit with the clients rather than sitting against him, providing the advice. Mr. Bharat Pathak is the founder of Wealth Managers India Private Limited. The firm is a leading mutual fund distributor, SEBI registered investment advisor, and portfolio management service provider. Wealth Managers clients include top-notch corporates, promoter families, business persons, and reputed professionals and non-resident Indians. So I again welcome you all for CFA India Society webinar, and I'll ask Mr. Bharat Pathak to start their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishikesh, and a big thank you to the Society of India for giving me this opportunity. This is a very elite band of very knowledgeable people, and I'm sure many people who are more experienced, more rich in their knowledge also may be attending this webinar. So I see this also as a big responsibility. Handholding clients through turbulent times is something which all of us are actually doing it. So I don't think I can add something very different. I'll try to put some kind of a framework or some kind of a structure around that. First and foremost, I think it is important to understand our roles. To give you an example, in a cricket match, there is somebody who is a slip fielder and there is somebody who is standing at third man. The batsman sneaks a ball, the slip fielder drops the catch, ball comes to the boundary, the third man misfields it and it goes for 4. Now, the slip fielder is playing a different role. The third man is playing a different role. The third man cannot ask the slip fielder that if you had, caught that ball, it would not have gone for 4 runs. So the job of the slip fielder was to take a wicket. Job of the third man was to prevent 4 runs from being scored. I think similarly, many times there is a confusion in the investor's mind, if not in the professional's mind, about what is the role of a fund manager or a portfolio manager and what is the role of an advisor, distributor, or asset allocator, if I can use that word. And I think that is the first thing which becomes very important for us as a starting point. The fund manager has a relative return mandate in a particular asset class. And fund manager can take only a limited cash call, if at all. So his job is very clear. From an asset allocator standpoint, he has a completely different role. Which asset class to allocate to, which manager to allocate to, what is the timing aspect, what is the pricing aspect of different asset classes, what is out of favor, what is likely to be in favor tomorrow, mean reversion. All these don't bother the fund manager. Once you select a manager or select a security, once you decide the timing, then his job starts. So I think the asset allocator is carrying a different responsibility altogether. And also very importantly, as far as the fund manager is concerned, he doesn't know the investor. But for the asset allocator, there is a face to the money, which means it is his friend, it is his relative, it is his own money, it is somebody with whom he has a long relationship. And that person is going to play a part in how the asset allocation is to be done. So I think very important to understand these two roles. Second aspect which I find useful here, that we are talking of hand-holding clients, but different clients will come with different goals. And for some of them, turbulent times may actually be better than a steadily trending market in one direction. So let's take the first example. If there is somebody who is building a goal-based long-term equity portfolio through dollar cost averaging or systematic investment plans. For this person, he is in it to collect equities at an average price over 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and get average returns relative to the index plus some outperformance by the fund managers that he selects. For him, an upward trending market is not necessarily a good thing. If the market goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down, and every time he sticks to the discipline, the turbulent market doesn't actually hurt him. The turbulent market allows him to buy at a reasonable price. There may be other type of clients who already has an existing diversified portfolio, and his objective is preservation of wealth in real purchasing power and to meet his cash flow needs. So this is a different type of a client. His situation will be different. Third is a pure equity portfolio for long-term wealth creation. So as opposed to preservation in the earlier example, somebody is looking at wealth creation, and he will approach his investments differently. So the asset allocator will have to use his experience, use his knowledge to be able to address different needs of different clients. The last thing in this aspect which I would like to say is, for most people, sale decisions are difficult. Buying decision is easy. And when the question of selling comes, there are 3-4 typical objections that we come across. If the portfolio has not moved, then he says, what is the point in selling? If the portfolio has gone up, he feels this is the way it is going to go up, so let me sell. And when the portfolio has gone up, there is also a feeling that I may have to pay too much of tax, so let me continue where I am. So if we can convert selling decisions into switch decisions, I think it becomes much more easy for the clients to digest that. We say that we see certain risk in A, but we see certain opportunity in B. And typically you will find that when the sun is setting somewhere, it is also possibly rising somewhere. So if we can bring our thinking to switching decisions, then the job becomes much easier. Second aspect that I would like to talk about is setting return expectations. And the credit for this goes to Howard Marks. He says, how risk and return is shown by the financial services industry. So this is a typical graph, and all of you must be familiar with that. On the left hand, you have money market with 6% return, and then the line steadily rises towards the right, and you say that as the risk goes up, bonds, then balance funds, then large cap equity, then mid and small cap, then private equity, venture capital, the returns are going to go up. And Howard Marks points out that this is a faulty graph. It talks about risk, but it does not show risk. If the graph is going so smoothly towards the right, then everybody would want to be at the rightmost corner here, because they don't see a risk. And the perception versus reality, if you look at the reality of risk and return, it looks something like this. In liquid funds, we have taken some anecdotal data here, and returns for 16 years, annual returns have been put in place. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are either debt funds or hybrid debt funds, which are on the conservative side. On the three numbers on the right hand side, balance funds, large cap equity, mid cap equity. Now I'll explain about the balance fund. In this 16 years, the worst 1 year return here was minus 41%. The best 1 year return was 92%. And the average return for this anecdotal fund, this is from the period from 2000 to 2016. The average return for this fund was 23%. Now, how many people know that if they put 100 rupees in a balance fund, and in a bad year, it can go to 60 rupees? Most of them believe that it is an FD which is going to give them 12% interest. And this is how it is also being positioned for many clients. Here, I think we have to look at the bad news. We have to say that minus 41%, minus 48%, minus 61% are possible. It has happened in the past. It can happen in the future. And if these expectations are put in place, it will not be an easy sale of a financial product, but it will be a sustainable investment in that product, that somebody comes in knowing the downside. The upside can take care of itself. We won't have to worry about it. So this risk and return reality, you do the same numbers over a 1 year rolling period, you do them over 3 year rolling period, you do them over 5 year rolling period. When you do them over a 10 year rolling period, you find that the worst returns on large cap equity are better than the best returns on the debt side. So I think the message is very clear. All of us know that long term and accepting the volatility, but knowing is knowing and doing is doing. So these are ideas which are simple to preach and difficult to practice. But I think this expectation setting is extremely important. We talk of investing through turbulent times, and I don't remember any day when the market has not been turbulent. So market is always turbulent, because there is a tussle between opportunity and loss of capital. There is a tussle between protecting the downside and capturing the upside. And this tussle is between millions of participants spread globally. So the turbulence is a part of life, but market has been viciously turbulent in some times. And if you look at since the inception of the Sensex, there have been 9 instances where market declines were 25% or more, and 3 instances where markets have declined, the index has declined more than 50%. The current decline in 2020, February and March, the market declined 38%. What was very different this time around is this erosion happened in a period of just 18 days. So most of us were surprised by the speed with which the market reacted. Many of us who have seen the dot-com bust, many of us who have seen the subprime crisis, we have seen declines, but the speed has surprised us. It is possibly due to computerized trading, AI, algorithmic trading, the ETFs which come and go, sovereign wealth funds having to sell because of the oil price drop. But the turbulence was really brutal and vicious in the month of March. So even the most seasoned investors would get upset by this kind of turbulence. There is another thing which we need to consider. Was this Corona crisis a tipping point for an aging bull market? After 2008, after the subprime crisis, we have seen synchronized policy action from central banks and governments in the developed countries. And they have tried to stabilize their economies. When the US Fed started talking about withdrawing this liquidity, the global markets went in a tailspin. You will all remember the taper tantrum. We have seen this liquidity, I mean, to stabilize the economy, this liquidity was brought in, the interest rates were brought very, very low. And with that, globally, we have had a bull market over the last 11 years. This is one of the longest bull markets in history. And possibly it was waiting for some reason. If you go back and listen to the videos of luminaries like Ray Dalio, Howard Marks, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, over the last 6 months, go back in November, go back in October, and you will find that they were all warning that this bull market is getting stretched way too much and the risks in the market are going up. The risks, we all thought that, oh, this is good to know and sometime it may come in helpful. But the vicious nature with which this happened sets this market aside from the Asian crisis, the Russian default, dot-com bubble, subprime. There is another aspect to it. The earlier crises were financial issues and they were taking place thousands of miles away. The present problem is a medical problem. And it is right here on our doorstep. All of us are locked down in our houses. We have never experienced something like this. And that makes it far more effective in terms of controlling our emotions, controlling the way we approach the market, controlling our behavior. They said the 4 most expensive words are this time it's different. But also we must remember that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So some things are similar, some things are different. What is different this time? A, this is a medical crisis. It is spilling over into the financial markets. For this medical crisis, as of today, there is no proven cure. Vaccines are still some time away. Containment has heavy economic costs. There are these companies who have leveraged very heavily. They are called zombie companies. It is estimated that even in the US, there are 16–18% of the companies who are unable to service their debt even in normal times or even in normal economy. So they were refinancing their debts to service their existing debts. New additions to the list will happen when suddenly we have gone through a big cash flow shock. Because companies who are able to meet their debt service requirements may suddenly find that they are unable to do so. Unemployment is off the charts, and we don't know when we will return to normal and what that new normal will be. So these are unknown and unknowable things as of today. What is unique about this crisis is this is in our doorstep. Subprime crisis happened when global and Indian economy had seen very strong growth. You will remember the period from 2003 to 2007, 2008. There was a very vibrant economy, and globally all economies were doing well. Here, there have been slowdowns in the economy, and it has been much more pronounced in the Indian economy over the last 2-3 years. Economic activity on top of it has been brutally disrupted. We don't know whether just financial solutions will help. And this is where governments and central banks in developed countries have front-loaded their stimulus, and central banks have buoyed the markets by cutting interest rates down to zero and flooding the market with enormous liquidity. This is the first order effect of the stimulus. We don't know what the second order consequences of this stimulus will be. When you are creating more and more currency, when there is a global corporate debt balloon, when you are looking at roughly $80 trillion of global GDP, but $250 trillion of global debt, then you know that printing more and more money possibly is not going to be the final solution. If supply of the money continues to increase and interest rates are practically zero, whether there will be a debasement of currencies. So I think we'll all be struggling to find out even the first order effects of the stimulus. But at some point, the second order consequences of the stimulus are, we will have to face those and possibly prepare for them. Now we come to the question of hand-holding, and I think one of the things which is worth considering here is, if, I mean, in an aeroplane, when you say that if the oxygen pressure in the cabin drops, they say you should put on a mask on your face first before helping others. And I think the similar concept we have to keep in mind over here. We are saying we want to handhold others. We have to make sure that we as advisors are standing on firm ground. And many of the things we have to look internally. What tells me that I am not wrong? What tells me I am not being driven by ego? What tells me that I know all the facts, or I have an understanding of various things that are there? And here I think the principle-centered approach will be helpful. Circumstances will change, but principles don't change. The principle of asset allocation, principle of diversification, bias towards quality, rebalancing, valuation, margin of safety. Academically, we know all this. And I think for a warrior, what he needs, only a sword is not enough. A warrior needs a sword, a pot of gold, and a mirror. He has to look at his strengths and weaknesses in the mirror before he sets out for war. Similarly, as advisors, many times we have to look in the mirror and we say, we know all these principles. Do we actually practice them ourselves? And can we practice them for the clients? If we are actually practicing these principles, I think today we would be sitting on a lot of cash. Where are we practicing this? When I reflect on this, many of our decisions are driven by FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. And we say, oh, this risk is likely to be there, but let me make money while it's there. And I know this risk will play out at some time, but currently let me continue what I'm doing. And one analogy I find it very useful, that stars don't go away. They are always there in the sky, but they are not visible in the daytime. The same is true for risk. Only when after the nightfall, you start seeing the stars. Similarly, the risk is seen when markets go down, the liquidity freezes, and there are issues. But let's decide, never let a crisis go waste. What we can change in our approach so that markets will always be turbulent, decisions will always have to be made. How my decisions will be driven by principles. The other thing, when the market drops, it is fashionable to say that, oh, this is a very attractive market and the prices are mouth-watering, etc., etc. The reality is, it is not as if none of us had heard about the stock markets and we woke up sometime in March 2020 with 100% in cash. If somebody is in that situation, yes, this is mouth-watering valuations, and obviously he must start in phases building up his portfolio in the market. But if we are fully invested, there will be severe pain in our existing holdings. If at all there is some cash, it will be very limited. And now that the reset button has been pressed, we will need to reorganize and reconstruct the existing portfolio. I don't think anybody has the liberty to say that, let me go out and buy because I don't have an existing portfolio. So I think when the price comes, when it is very, very cheap, we will not feel like buying because that liquidity may not be there, that courage may not be there, and that leeway may not be there. One of my stock market friend, he's very fond of saying that market में बहुत बार 4 आने में ताजमहल मिलता है, मगर 4 आना किसी के पास नहीं होता. So just keep that in mind. I think asset allocation is a primary foundation. If we have been using it, or if we even today start using it, it will help us to help the clients. It will help us to make better decisions. And I think this is the point which is very relevant for the client side. And asset allocation has 2 dimensions. Asset allocation has a market dimension, but asset allocation has a personal or family situation as a dimension. And in today's times, I think this becomes extremely relevant because clients may be facing a number of risks in their own life. If somebody has a factory, the factory is closed down, he has to pay the bills, he has to pay the salaries in that factory. His own business is at standstill. Everybody who is running a business builds some kind of a buffer. But how big a buffer you can build? To pay salaries for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And at this point, he is really worried because he is facing risks from a number of sides. Those who are in service, they may feel that their job has become insecure. They may be facing pay cuts. And they may also have education loans, they may have EMIs to service. And what was the risk appetite in normal times, the risk appetite or the risk profile itself may change. So I think we have to be very sensitive to this part. It is important to reassess the risk profile. The risk profile which was created at the time of investment may have undergone significant change. Drawing up a fresh financial plan will be required. What is also necessary in these turbulent times is being closer to the clients, having better communication, and thankfully with things like Zoom and Google Duo and Microsoft Teams, even through a lockdown, we are able to do that. But even pick up the phone, speak to them, listen to them, let them speak their issues, show empathy and understanding. and rebuild, reorganize. A reset button has been pressed. So reset the financial plan, reset the financial portfolio, and take things as if this is a new normal. The other side of asset allocation is the market situation. So I said this is what is I am able to bring to the table, but where to put it, I will have to look at the market. I will have to look at the prices. Now valuations are down, but are they cheap? I mean, we say that price earning ratio is down, but it is not down to the earlier crisis levels. We say price to book value is at the lower end of the rung, but the ROEs have dropped very significantly. In the decade from 2000 to 2010, the ROEs were much higher. In the next decade, the ROEs are much, much lower. And if ROEs are lower, a lower price to book value has to be the new norm. Today, forward earnings for most companies are going to be very difficult because we don't know when they will come back on track. Credit markets are in a tight spot. Domestic stimulus, we have seen developed countries give very high stimulus, but domestic stimulus capacity is limited, and the stimulus will have to be focused on survival rather than growth. We also don't know whether a second wave of infections will start coming. This morning I read that Singapore, 931 people have been found infected, and they were at number 3 behind China and India in Asia. So Japan has gone through a second wave of infection. So we don't know whether further dragging of lingering of this issue is going to be there. Having said this, obviously, this is not a permanent problem. At some point, it is going to go away. This is a flu of a different variety. Some of the best brains in the pharma business are after this. First, what they're looking for is a treatment for people who have been infected. And mostly they are trying alternate use of existing medicines, which can be used. The hydroxychloroquine, you must have heard, there are a lot of hopes attached to that. But number of other medicines will be tried here, and some results will start coming in. And this problem may be behind us in, I don't know, but possibly 4 months, 6 months, there may be some treatment which will be found over here. Reasons for optimism are also lower oil prices. The forex reserves of the country are in a much better situation than they were 5-7 years ago. There is a trend of shifting manufacturing activities away from China. So maybe India will be a beneficiary over there. In India, reform happens only during crisis. So if you go back to 1991, the Big Bang reform which happened in India was due to the crisis where we had to hypothecate our gold to the Bank of England. So whenever there is crisis, reform happens. So we'll see, I think, some big steps, some bold steps over there. And there will be new winners in the new normal. So some of the existing leaders may go away, but the new leaders will emerge. This is human innovation. There is the resilience. There is the capacity to bounce back. So I think like all past turbulences, this is turbulent time, but it is not here forever. How we act in this period, what principle-centered leadership we are able to give to our clients is very important. But it doesn't mean I go out and buy everything today. I totally finish off all the liquidity which I may be having. There may be a period of possibly 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, where the markets will be unstable. They may go down from any rebound rallies that we have seen. In the past crisis, we have seen that the markets rebound but these rallies may not be sustainable. So similar situation may be there even in this market. And here, when you don't know what to do, you turn to the big leaders, you turn to the lighthouses who tell you about the principles. So I think it will be useful to see how Charlie Munger is approaching this. And he has very clearly said that today we are like a captain of a ship when the worst typhoon that ever has happened comes. We just want to get through the typhoon, and we'd rather come out with it with a whole lot of liquidity. We are not playing, oh, goody, goody, everything is going to hell. Let's plunge in 100% of our reserves into buying businesses. Warren wants to keep Berkshire safe. And for this, we'll be conservative, we'll be on the safe side, and we will emerge on the other side very strong. So in these turbulent times, it is important to be safe, liquid, and flexible. Discretion is the better part of the valor. Thank you for a patient hearing. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Bharat sir. It was very different and enlightening to hear you speak on the license and how to handle the investors. We have few questions. I have some questions from my side as well. I would like to ask the first question is how to face the behavioral biases from the investor side and how not to overcome them on our own biases as an advisor.
I think Rishikesh, you have hit the nail on the head because we'll all be subject to biases, and I'm sure the investors will have a bias, we will have a bias, and there may be a number of biases which are playing at the same time. And this is where I think going back to the theory, reflecting on your decisions, that are you jumping the gun, are you taking things, deciding things in a panic. I mean, somebody says that let me remove all my equity. Clearly, he's being pressurized by a recency bias in what he has seen. No doubt, we have to be sensitive that he has been steadily investing for the last 5 years, and 5 years of returns have been wiped out in just a matter of a month or two. So obviously, there will be disturbance. And that recency will have a much bigger weight on his mind. Here, if we look at the longer period history, if we show some of the examples like what we discussed, what happened in the subprime crisis, what happened in the Asian crisis, I think that will create a gap between the stimulus and the response. So when something happens, you want to immediately take a decision. Thinking slow will be useful. So create a gap between a decision, a proposal and a decision. I think that is what will help us overcome the biases.
Okay. So next question is related to the similar. You spoke about switching the fund between the assets. So are you suggesting like switching funds between just different classes of mutual fund, or is it between the different asset classes as well? Like if you are invested into like mutual fund, redeem it and invest into real estate or that kind of thing?
I think we will keep this discussion essentially for
okay.
Because real estate is a different subject.
Okay.
But within financial assets, I think that the objective here should be how should I reorganize my portfolio for the new normal, the way it emerges. So today we may not have 100% visibility on the new normal, So things will emerge over a period of time. But can I adjust my portfolio for the new normal? And why I say reorganize or readjust? Because like I said, I'm not sitting on 100% cash. I have to accept that this is where my portfolio is, and this is how I need to reorient it. So I don't think there is any restriction on looking at various asset classes, various geographies, various sectors, even various market cap sizes. So you may have started building up a position in, let's say, small cap and mid caps in the last year. And now in the new situation, you may decide that from a stability standpoint, you may want to move from small caps to mid caps or mid caps to large caps. So there is a market cap bias which you may want to change. You may want to go partly in cash. You may want to say that, let me look at higher quality companies and portfolios which are constructed of higher quality companies. Higher quality companies meaning those who have good ROE, low borrowing, good brand power. And you said no borrowing means they may be a little more stable. You may also find 6 months down the road that you again need to reorient your portfolio because deep value has become deeper value, and there is more attraction from a long-term perspective. For example, today metal companies have crashed, oil companies have crashed, but at some point you will come to a realization that the world cannot go on without oil and metals.
Yeah.
The high-cost producers may have got eliminated or compromised or acquired by that time. We will have a new dynamic in those industries. So there may be good quality companies, there may be bargains. You may find that certain sectors have not seen a disruption in their revenues. So I'm not saying suddenly they're going to start a new bull run or something like that, but at least their revenue is intact. So you will find telecom companies, for example, their revenue is intact. You will find pharma companies, their revenue is intact. So you may want to reorient the portfolio to something like that. You may also look at some other geographies where you may want to invest. So I think take the existing pieces of the portfolio and see how you move the jigsaw.
Right. Okay, thanks, Bharat sir. This is a question from Rishabh. He wants to ask, like, what is the measures have been or should have been taken by government to provide assistance to the so-called zombie companies? So, do you have a view on this?
One of the things I have found very, very useful is to focus on what we can do. What the government should do, what Reserve Bank should do, what the Federal Reserve should do, what the US President should do, I think is a very, very big drag on our time. And today we realize that while we are locked down in our homes, we are all working overtime, A, to get more information, and B, to be closer with the client. So I think let the government do its job. Let's see that how they do and how it translates to our investments. Our suggestions to the government, I don't think is going to contribute very meaningfully to ourselves and our clients.
Definitely. So here is a very interesting question. So what will be your response on if client asks, "Kya mutual fund sahi hai?"
No, बिल्कुल सही है. See, this is where we said that what is the role of the slip feeder and what is the role of the third man. So it is the advisor's role to stand between the client and a big mistake. When we have allocated money to a particular manager, whether he has been able to give good relative returns over a long period of time. And here, let me go back the last 12, 18 months when all mutual fund schemes were underperforming the Nifty. And instead of looking at it as a risk of narrowing of a bull market, where one sector had become 40% of the Nifty, all the returns were coming from a few handful of companies. And this is classic case of increasing risk in the market. We started saying that mutual funds, fund managers are unable to beat the Nifty. So our attention was somewhere else. And today we wish that we had focused on why that underperformance is coming. So I think mutual fund is definitely a good value proposition. And many people start saying that, should I go into index funds? Should I directly buy some stocks? And let me buy blue chips and sleep over it. You will find that they will also be driven by what has worked in the last 3, 4, 5 years. If you look at the last 20 years, you will find that the stocks which were in the top 10 list in 2000, very few of them were in the top 10 list in 2010. And those who are in the top in 2010, very few of them are in the top 10 list in 2020. So stock picking is not an easy game. It takes investing a lot of time, efforts, and little bit of luck which is required. So when clients feel that they can buy the top stocks and be done with that, I think they are overestimating their ability to pick stocks. And a well-diversified, risk-controlled portfolio, we have some of the best talent who is managing that. So I have no hesitation in saying that mutual fund continues to be safe.
And what is your view on, like, is it a good time to get investment in small cap, mid cap, since it is at a like lower price, or may say cheaper, or should we stay at a large cap or more diversified, better, good company stocks?
I would rather say that this is a time for stability. So look at companies which are likely to survive. There may be some very good small cap companies which will have the wherewithal to survive this downturn. And you cannot stamp them out because they're small caps. But I think who will survive and who will thrive in that order is how it will have to be looked at. Even in the large cap space, there will be companies who have borrowed very heavily and whose business models have been disturbed. We have seen many companies go from large cap to small cap in the last 5 years, right?
Okay. Yes.
They were not safe because they were large caps. So safety, I think, is a different consideration, but today safety is important.
There is one interesting question, like if we compare like GDP to debt ratio for India versus developed countries, India is not in the like top, like most leveraged countries. Still, why do you think that developed countries are able to provide a higher stimulus compared to the India, which is not providing a huge amount of stimulus?
Yeah. So this essentially revolves around being the reserve currency of the world. So US dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and they have a unique power in the sense that they can borrow in their own currency. Globally, there is always only one country who can borrow in its own currency. And because it has the power to print money, the default risk is not there. So with this practically unlimited stimulus capacity is created. Till that reserve currency status is challenged. So at some point, and if you go back after the Bretton Woods agreement, Second World War time, this got challenged in 1971 when US had run a big fiscal deficit, and they were unable to back the dollar with gold, which was the promise at that time. So they had to, in a way, de-link the dollar from gold. And after that, the printing press has been in full swing last 40, 50 years. So their ability to give stimulus in their own currency is very high because they are the reserve currency of the world. For India, our currency may not remain stable if we, forget about fiscal prudence and give very large stimulus. Then we'll have problems on the currency.
Yeah. Sir, there was a very interesting announcement a week back from Franklin Templeton. And what is your take on the low risk, not low risk, but low duration fund safety and the risk fund or debt fund safety perspective?
Come again?
So we had this Franklin Templeton closing of 6 fund last week. So
Right.
What is your take on the in general debt funds or low duration fund safety in the market?
So all funds are not of the same category. Even within the same fund house, there are funds which cater to a different credit quality altogether. If you look at the SEBI reclassification sometime back, they made it compulsory to call funds in a category called credit risk funds, right? So a warning is printed on the cigarette packet that it can be injurious to health. Similarly, I think they talk that these funds have a credit risk and invest with your eyes open when you're. So I showed the picture of risk and return. The risk is rarely perceived, but I think you cannot paint all debt funds with a broad brush, and there will be categories where you have government securities funds, you have banking and PSU debt funds, you have high credit quality funds, which will not face even a liquidity issue. A GSEC fund, there is no reason to say that all debt funds should be looked at in the same way. So first look at the vertical. Within that vertical also, I'm sure even within credit risk fund, there will be funds which are able to manage their liquidity very well. They are able to take care of the downsides of that market and still earn a good return. And there can be, of course, very, very enterprising credit risk funds also. I mean, we all like to quote Howard Marks, but what is Oaktree Capital? Come to think of it, he is able to get outsized returns from credit. So one event need not be equated to the entire industry.
Right, definitely. So here is one more question from more of a person who wants to know that what will be your advice? Am I audible, right?
Yeah.
So that many times the client starts off with discussing with their goals and all sort, and it leads to the discussion on macroeconomic condition, and it just weaves off the gist of the discussion. So how should you make the investor to focus only on the goals and the things they need to plan out rather than going into macroeconomic discussion and other things?
I think we just tried to avoid a question on what the government should do.
No. I'm asking. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was one way of defocusing on the macro and focusing on
Yes,
what is within our control. But see, it's a fact of life that there is an information overload in today's times, and even investors are being bombarded from various angles on social media, on financial television, on the internet. There is so much news that it is very easy to get distracted. If we take that discussion only up to a point and again bring the focus back on what is in my circle of competence. So circle of competence and circle of influence. Circle of concern will always be much bigger, but I can do what is in my hands. If we can bring the subject back to, okay, what is the action plan? Because I can discuss 100 things, but what we can act, and that opinion turning to a decision, that is the important part over there. So for a decision, you have to do things which are within your control, with a margin of safety if you can.
Thanks. It was very enlightening because many times we try to give answers to the questions which are not in our hand, and we try to justify someone else's decision and someone else control altogether. I'd like to go to the second last question, which is related to what will be your advice to the PMS investors, because many PMS investors have their portfolios shrunk by more margin compared to even like mutual funds. So should they stay invested? Should they look for exit, or what should they do?
It will start with understanding why they went into PMS to start to begin with. So I think most of them wanted concentration in their portfolios. Then they wanted higher returns from their portfolios. And I think if the fund manager process is right, there is no reason to, just escape out of those PMSs. It may also be a good idea if you have an interaction with the fund manager and you understand the way he's approaching it. You may even decide that you may want to add money in the lower prices over a period of time to that PMS. So I think process and results are two different things, and we judge a process by the result. We should do it the other way around. What was the probability of success? Sometimes for a decision there may be 80% probability of success, 20% probability of a failure, and due to luck some events will fall in that 20% bracket. That doesn't mean that the process itself was wrong. So I think it is a good idea to read through the communication which portfolio managers make and see what their process is. Also, many of them will be reorienting their portfolios to the new situations. So that is something also definitely worth looking at.
Sure, thanks, Bharat sir. So my last question is totally on different perspective, and I'll definitely like to know, because I can see many books which are at your back, and how you are spending your time, like reading which books, and what is the current book you are reading, and what books will you recommend?
I have come across 5-6 very good books in the last couple of years. I'm sure you would have seen Ray Dalio's book Principles?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have read it, reread it. That is
Okay.
one thing.
Definitely.
Howard Marks has written a fantastic book called Mastering Market Cycles. Again, read it and reflect on it. Uh, there is one more book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which is Skin in the Game. An eye-opener. All advisors must read that.
Okay. And any specific book you are reading currently, or just completed reading?
So these
Okay.
the ones which I spoke.
Okay. Thanks, Bharat sir. It was really good session where we were able to understand what is your thinking process, and this was really different from what we hear normally. Like everybody wants to talk about everything, including what Russia should do, what US should do, what India should do, and they don't focus on what we can do and we needs to do. And they also forget the basic principle and try to move around the other like age of the principles. They try to the way it is, like they try to practice other medicine instead of practicing their own medicine which they know better. So this was a very interesting session, and I'd like to sum it all that we heard a session from Bharat sir. You can listen to the recording on CFA India Society website. Also, I'd like to remind all the participants to please fill the survey form, for which Vidhi will be sharing a link in the chat. The survey forms will give us feedback about the session. For CFA Institute members, the survey form is mandatory to get the C credits, and you can get the link to the presentation in the chat itself. We won't be sharing any PowerPoint presentation on email or to the participant. So that's it. I'd like to thank you, Bharat sir, for providing us with your expertise and giving us time for this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine.
Over to you, Vidhi.